beneath the romanticized legends of wagon trails, frontier bravery, and endless opportunity lies a harsher, often ignored reality of the American West. It was never a land of abundance, but a land of absence, defined not by what it had, but by what it desperately lacked: water. Long before the West became a symbol of freedom and expansion, it was a region ruled by thirst, where survival hinged on access to rivers, springs, and seasonal streams that could disappear without warning. Early settlers arrived with Eastern assumptions, believing rainfall would follow the plow, convinced that effort alone could bend nature to their will. Instead, they encountered an unforgiving environment where drought was not an anomaly but a constant threat. The illusion of limitless land shattered quickly when families realized that a homestead without water was a death sentence, and that ownership of land meant nothing if it lay beyond reach of a reliable source. As miners flooded into California, Nevada, and Colorado during the gold and silver rushes, competition intensified overnight. Camps sprang up around creeks, and whoever arrived first claimed not just land, but the water itself, diverting streams with crude ditches and wooden flumes. There were no laws, no regulations, only force, vigilance, and the willingness to defend a claim at all costs. Disputes erupted constantly, sometimes settled with threats, sometimes with bullets, and often with quiet sabotage carried out under cover of darkness. Meanwhile, indigenous communities who had lived sustainably with these water systems for centuries found themselves pushed aside, their access blocked or redirected without negotiation. Rivers that once supported complex ecosystems and cultural lifeways were suddenly reduced to commodities, measured, rationed, and exploited. This chaotic scramble gave birth to a radical legal doctrine known as prior appropriation, a system that declared water belonged to whoever claimed and used it first, regardless of land ownership. It was a rule born not from fairness, but from desperation, and it would define the West for generations. As you listen to this story, consider this question. When survival depends on controlling water, how quickly does cooperation give way to conflict? And if the foundation of the West was built on scarcity, what kind of future was it destined to inherit? Before we continue, this is Western Tales Official, where we uncover the hidden histories beneath legendary landscapes. If stories like this challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to subscribe and join us as we unearth the forgotten forces that shaped the modern world. As the West transitioned from scattered settlements into structured territories and states, water conflict did not disappear, it scaled up. What had once been neighbor-against-neighbor disputes evolved into vast, coordinated campaigns driven by capital, politics, and engineering ambition. Railroads, agricultural conglomerates, and urban developers quickly understood that controlling water meant controlling growth itself. With federal backing, massive infrastructure projects emerged, transforming rivers into instruments of power. Dams rose across canyons, reservoirs swallowed valleys, and aqueducts stretched hundreds of miles, redirecting water away from rural regions toward booming cities. Few examples illustrate this better than the Owens Valley, where Los Angeles quietly acquired water rights through deception, legal manipulation, and political pressure, draining an entire agricultural region to fuel urban expansion. Farmers watched their land turn to dust as their lifeline was diverted south, and resistance followed. Sabotage, bombings, and open revolt erupted as locals fought to reclaim what had been taken. But the imbalance of power was absolute. Courts sided with cities, engineers with progress, and newspapers framed resistance as backward obstruction. The narrative was clear. Water extraction was destiny, and sacrifice zones were unavoidable. Behind the scenes, a new class of water barons emerged, individuals and institutions that treated rivers as assets and scarcity as leverage. The federal government reinforced this system through projects like the Hoover Dam, which not only reshaped landscapes but locked in allocation agreements based on unusually wet years, creating an illusion of abundance that still haunts the West today. Entire ecosystems collapsed under altered flow regimes, fish populations vanished, and wetlands dried up, all in service of an economic vision that prioritized growth above sustainability. Ask yourself this: when engineering triumphs override ecological reality, who truly pays the price? As these massive systems took hold, they didn't resolve water conflict, they froze it into law, ensuring future battles would be fought not just in fields and valleys, but in courtrooms and legislatures. This is the unseen machinery behind the Western myth, a reminder that progress often masks displacement, and infrastructure can be as violent as any weapon when wielded without restraint. For indigenous nations of the American West, water was never merely a resource, it was identity, spirituality, and survival intertwined. Rivers marked ancestral territories, sustained agriculture, and anchored ceremonial life. Yet, as the West expanded, water became a tool of dispossession, used deliberately to dismantle indigenous autonomy. Treaties that promised access to rivers and fertile land were routinely ignored or reinterpreted, while reservations were often established on arid, marginal land deliberately lacking reliable water sources. When dams and diversions followed, the consequences were catastrophic. Sacred sites disappeared beneath reservoirs, fisheries collapsed, and traditional farming systems became impossible. Unlike settlers who could litigate or relocate, indigenous communities were trapped within imposed boundaries, watching as water flowed past them to benefit others. The legal system compounded this injustice by delaying recognition of tribal water rights for decades, sometimes over a century, leaving communities without the means to develop infrastructure even when rights were eventually acknowledged. Children grew up hauling water across vast distances while nearby cities flourished on diverted rivers. Even today, many tribal nations lack basic water access, a direct legacy of these historical decisions. Yet resistance never vanished. Indigenous leaders fought through courts, activism, and coalition building to reclaim water sovereignty, challenging the foundational assumptions of Western water law. Their victories, while hard-won, expose the moral contradictions embedded in the system. How can a society claim progress while denying its first inhabitants access to life itself? As you reflect on this history, consider how many modern water debates still exclude indigenous voices, despite their deep ecological knowledge and sustainable practices. Understanding the West's water story without acknowledging this erasure leaves the narrative incomplete. Because the true cost of these water wars is measured not just in dried rivers, but in broken cultures and enduring inequality. Today, the American West stands at a breaking point, and the echoes of its buried water wars are impossible to ignore, stretch across decades. Reservoirs shrink to historic lows, and once mighty rivers struggle to reach the sea. Climate change has intensified evaporation, reduced snowpack, and exposed the fragility of allocation systems designed for a past that no longer exists. Yet water rights remain locked into rigid frameworks established during periods of relative abundance, forcing states, cities, and agricultural districts into escalating conflict. The same principles that once fueled frontier disputes now drive interstate legal battles as millions compete for diminishing supplies. Population growth continues. Agriculture demands remain high, and the illusion of control persists, even as scientific projections warn of permanent scarcity. What makes this crisis uniquely dangerous is that the infrastructure built to conquer drought now limits adaptability. Dams trap sediment, canals leak, and ecosystems deprived of natural flow lose resilience. The West is confronting a paradox. The very systems designed to ensure survival may now accelerate collapse. As wildfires rage and aquifers decline, the question is no longer whether the past matters, but whether its lessons will be acknowledged in time. Can societies built on extraction transition to conservation, or will history repeat itself under harsher conditions? This moment forces a reckoning, one that exposes the cost of ignoring environmental limits for generations. If water scarcity shaped the West once before, what happens when there is no frontier left to absorb the consequences? Despite the gravity of the crisis, the story of Western water is not finished. Across the region, new approaches are emerging that challenge the old logic of conquest and control. Cities experiment with water recycling, farmers adopt precision irrigation, and tribes reclaim stewardship roles that restore ecosystems alongside cultural renewal. Collaboration, once dismissed as impractical, is becoming a necessity. Yet these solutions require confronting uncomfortable truths about consumption, growth, and equity. The future of the West depends not on finding new sources, but on redefining value, recognizing water as a shared responsibility rather than a prize to be seized. This shift demands political courage, legal reform, and public awareness grounded in historical understanding. The buried water wars of the past are not distant relics. They are active forces shaping every decision made today. As viewers, citizens, and participants in this unfolding story, the question becomes deeply personal. Will we continue repeating patterns born of desperation, or can we finally learn from them? If the West was forged in thirst, perhaps its future can be forged in restraint, cooperation, and respect for limits. This is Western Tales Official, and if this story expanded your understanding of how history flows into the present, subscribe to the channel and stay with us as we continue uncovering the hidden forces that define our world.